There is a sight in some forests that feels almost offensive to what we think we know about life. A tree stump, cut years ago, sitting low in moss and leaf litter. No branches, no leaves, no crown reaching for light. By every simple rule, it should be dead. And yet, if you peel back a little bark, sometimes the tissue underneath is still green, still alive. In some cases, researchers have measured water moving through it, cells still active, living wood still hanging on long after the visible tree seems finished. That should be impossible. A tree without leaves cannot photosynthesize. It cannot make the sugars that power repair, defense, and survival. So where is the energy coming from? Sometimes from the trees standing around it. The forest does something most people never imagine. It keeps feeding a neighbor that looks like it has already lost. At first, that sounds like one of those beautiful nature stories people want to be true. Because the version most of us learned is the opposite. Trees compete. They race for light. They pull from the same soil. They shade, crowd, and outgrow one another. And that picture is real. Forests are competitive places. But it is not the whole picture. Hidden under the soil is another reality, quieter and far stranger. Trees are often physiologically connected. They exchange signals. They alter one another's chances of survival. And under certain conditions, resources move from one tree into another. When people say trees share food, the word food can sound soft and vague. What is really moving is mostly carbon-rich sugar, the basic currency a tree manufactures from sunlight. Leaves pull in carbon dioxide and, through photosynthesis, turn it into usable chemical energy. That energy moves through living tissue called phloem, feeding roots, growing wood, healing wounds, and supporting every quiet process that keeps a tree alive. So, if a tree is shaded, damaged, or cut off from its own energy supply, carbon becomes a matter of life and death. And if carbon shows up in that tree after it could not have made enough itself, the question is no longer poetic. It is forensic. Who supplied it? Part of the answer lies in a partnership older than forests as we know them. Mycorrhizal fungi. These are fungal threads in the soil that wrap around or enter plant roots. In exchange for sugar from the tree, the fungi help gather water and nutrients, especially hard-to-get resources like nitrogen and phosphorus. But those fungi do more than act like delivery services from soil to root. When one fungal network links multiple trees, it can also become a pathway between them. Not a magical internet with tiny messages typed underground. Something more biological than that. A living web of exchange, chemistry, pressure, and opportunity. And fungi are not the only root. Trees can also form root grafts. Literal fusions where neighboring roots grow together and share vascular tissue. Once that happens, the boundary between one tree and the next becomes less absolute than it looks from above. This stopped being just a romantic idea when ecologists began tracing carbon itself. In the 1990s, forest ecologist Suzanne Simard and her colleagues, working in Canadian forests, they used carbon isotopes to test whether paper birch and Douglas-fir were exchanging carbon through shared fungal networks. They found that carbon could move between them, and the direction depended on circumstance. When Douglas-fir seedlings were shaded, they received more carbon. When seasons shifted and birch lost its leaves, the balance could reverse. That matters because it changes the story completely. A tree that looks weak is not always abandoned. In some cases, the network shifts with need. The forest is not just a crowd of individuals standing near each other. It is a system where traffic can change depending on who can give and who is suddenly at risk. Later, work from Simard and other forest ecologists suggested that large, older trees often act as hubs, linked to many seedlings through shared fungi. Simard called them mother trees because they appear to support younger trees with carbon, nutrients, and signals, especially in established forests. The phrase is memorable, and scientists rightly debate its limits. Are these trees actively directing aid, Or do they simply have more roots, more fungal links, and more carbon to spare? That debate is healthy. But the core point survives it. Old trees are more than big wood. They can function as infrastructure. Remove enough of them, and you do not just remove trunks. You weaken the connective tissue of the forest. Scientists still argue over exactly how much resource transfer is actively regulated by trees, how much is influenced by fungi, and how much is simply the physics of connected living tissue. That caution matters. We do not need fantasy here. The real biology is already astonishing. Because whether the movement is partly strategic, partly reciprocal, or partly driven by pressure differences, the result is the same. A tree can end up supporting another tree that is stressed, shaded, young, or even apparently dying. And then there are the stumps. Foresters have long noticed that some stumps refuse to die. In species that readily graft roots, a cut stump can remain alive for years, sometimes far longer, even though it has no leaves to earn its own living. In New Zealand, researchers including Sebastian Lusinger and Martin Bader studied a leafless kauri stump that was still physiologically active. Its internal water flow rose and fell with the rhythms of nearby trees, as if its neighbors were drawing and releasing water on its behalf. The stump had become dependent on a communal plumbing system. In other forests, living stumps have been documented in redwoods, pines, and other species with connected roots. What looked like leftover wood turned out to be a dependent survivor, maintained by links the eye cannot see. Hydraulic support is not the same as proving a dinner delivery. Water flow alone does not prove sugar transfer. But in trees, water transport, mineral movement, and carbon flow are all part of the same living economy. Where roots are grafted, neighboring trees can share access to resources and, in some cases, carbon-rich sap. So, even when the exact balance of what is moving varies, the deeper point is clear. These trees are not isolated competitors. They are attached. And attachment changes the rules. So why would a tree do this? The first answer is almost mechanical. In any connected system, resources tend to move from where they are abundant to where demand is high. Plant physiologists call these source-sink relationships. A leafy, sunlit tree is a source. A shaded seedling, a wounded root, a growing bud, or a leafless stump becomes a sink, a place pulling hard on available sugars or water. If two trees are joined through fungi or grafted roots, part of that pull can cross the boundary. In other words, some sharing may happen because a desperate tree becomes a strong draw on the network. Not charity, but not randomness either. It is living physics shaped by evolution. The second answer is reciprocity across time. In a forest, the donor of one season may be the receiver in the next. Simard's birch and fir work showed this beautifully. Birch, with broad leaves and fast summer growth, can be a major carbon source when fir is shaded. But fir stays green when birch is bare, and later the balance can shift. What looks like one-way generosity may actually be rotating insurance. Today's healthy tree is not necessarily helping a loser. It may be preserving a partner it will need when conditions change. And this pattern matters most when conditions are not equal. In greenhouse and field studies, seedlings connected to established trees or shared mycorrhizal networks often perform differently from isolated seedlings. Some survive shade better, some recover stress more effectively. In some studies, related seedlings appear to benefit more than unrelated ones, suggesting kinship can matter. Though the evidence varies by species and setting, the details are still being refined. But the larger message is clear. Connection changes survival odds. The third answer is that a neighbor is often not just a neighbor. In many forests, nearby trees are related, or at least established within the same long-term web of roots, fungi, and local conditions. Supporting a relative can help preserve shared genes. Supporting a longtime partner can preserve something just as practical: the underground architecture of the forest itself. A living root system helps hold soil, move water, host fungi, and stabilize the space around it. Even a stump is not biologically meaningless if its roots remain woven into the lives of others. From the perspective of the network, keeping some tissue alive may be cheaper than losing the connection entirely, and support does not have to last forever to matter. A stressed tree kept alive for an extra season can still anchor soil, support fungi, store resources, or remain part of the network until conditions improve. From our perspective, that may look like delaying the inevitable. From an evolutionary perspective, delay can be everything. There may also be another player here with its own agenda. The fungi connecting tree to tree are not selfless couriers. They live by trade. A fungus benefits when its host plants stay alive long enough to keep paying in carbon. If a fungal network links several trees, redistributing resources toward a stressed partner can help protect the larger marketplace the fungus depends on. So, the decision is probably not sitting in one trunk or one species. It emerges from a whole web of interacting organisms, each responding to stress, reward, and survival. This is where the idea of plant intelligence becomes useful, if we use it carefully. Trees do not have brains. They do not have neurons like ours. But they do sense, integrate, and respond to information constantly. Roots track moisture gradients, leaves detect changes in light quality and the chemical traces of nearby plants. Wounded tissues can send electrical signals and hormonal alarms through the body. Some attacked plants release airborne chemicals that prime neighbors to raise defenses. Shared fungal networks can also carry warning cues below ground. None of that makes a tree a person, but it does make the old image of plants as passive decoration completely inadequate. Feeding a stressed neighbor belongs to this larger picture. It is one expression of a living system that monitors conditions and reallocates resources in ways that improve survival. And here is the reframe that changes everything. The dying tree is not necessarily being pitied. It is still part of the forest's body plan. What looks to us like one individual fading away may, to the network, be a still connected node with roots, microbes, stored compounds, and unfinished value. What looks like compassion is often connected self-interest. And that does not make it less beautiful, it makes it more real. That is why the sight of a living stump feels so uncanny. It breaks the story we tell ourselves about where one life ends and another begins. In a forest, identity is real, but independence is overrated. Trees stand alone above ground, below ground, and many of them survive by being less alone than they appear. There is also a harder edge to this story. Connection is powerful, but it is fragile. The same underground links that can help a weak tree can also spread pathogens. The same grafts that stabilize one stump can tie neighbors into shared risk. And when forests are fragmented, repeatedly disturbed, compacted by heavy machinery, or stripped of old trees, those hidden networks can be broken. A seedling in an intact forest may tap into decades or centuries of fungal relationships. A seedling in damaged soil may face the world with that support system missing. In drought, heat, or disease outbreaks, these invisible ties can help determine whether a forest absorbs stress or begins to unravel. So food sharing is not a sentimental extra. It is part of the resilience machinery of ecosystems. It may also explain why some planted trees struggle in ways old forests do not. A tree dropped into isolated ground, surrounded by pavement or disturbed soil, is often cut off from the kind of fungal partnerships and community buffering woodland trees evolved with. It has roots, yes, but not necessarily a neighborhood. That does not mean every forest tree lives in harmony, or every city tree is doomed. It means connection is ecological context, not background scenery. And maybe that is why this idea lands so deeply once you really let it in. We are used to thinking of survival as the triumph of the strongest, the tallest, the most independent. Forests tell a subtler truth. Strength can include exchange. Survival can include support. Not kindness in the human moral sense, necessarily. Something older than that. Interdependence. A tree may feed a dying neighbor because the border between self-interest and shared interest has blurred underground. Because a network that buffers the weak can protect everyone when conditions turn. Because life, when it is densely entangled, does not always spend its energy by the simple rule of abandon the failing and save the strong. That is important, because the wonder here does not depend on pretending trees love each other the way we do. The wonder is that natural selection, fungal ecology, plant signaling, and basic biological physics can produce a forest that behaves more meaningfully than our old cliches allow. Not a battlefield only, not a fairy commune either. A dynamic society of exchange, conflict, memory, and mutual dependence. So, when you pass a stump now, especially one deep in a healthy forest, it may no longer look like a leftover object. It may be a quiet participant in an underground process still unfolding. A tree that lost its crown, but not its connections. A reminder that death in ecosystems is rarely an instant event, and almost never a solitary one. Under the bark, under the moss, under the soil, resources may still be moving. Water, carbon, chemical signals, fungal trades. The forest, through countless local interactions, yet determining what is still worth sustaining. And that may be the most profound part of all. The ordinary woods outside our cities and trails are not passive scenery. They are places where life is negotiated continuously, where roots and fungi and chemistry turn stillness into action. What looks silent is full of information, response, and support without sentiment. Once you know that, a weakened tree is never just a weakened tree again. It is a clue, a question, a signal that something larger than the trunk is happening. If you've ever seen a stump, a damaged tree, or a patch of forest that suddenly feels different after hearing this, tell me about it in the comments. I'd love to know what ordinary plant moment you'll never see the same way again. And if you want more science-based stories that reveal what plants are really doing beneath the surface, subscribe and stay with me.